My name's Russ Lowe, and I'm with Education for Social Justice Foundation. And we are developing curriculum to teach the history of the comfort women's sexual slavery that happened during the war in the Pacific.
Dianne Feinstein and a Chinese spy, the unsuspecting mole who got a front row seat to the senator's dealings for 2 decades.
Was Feinstein's driver for 20 years, who also served as a gopher in her Bay Area office and was a liaison to the Asian American community. He even attended Chinese consulate functions for the senator. Senator Feinstein was the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee at the time and was reportedly mortified when the FBI told her
of Feinstein's so-called Chinese driver. It turns out he was quite a bit more than a driver. This is remarkable. The identity first of the spy who worked, quote unquote, as Feinstein put it, as a driver for 20 years.
This is a guy named Russell Lowe, L-E-W-E. He's a Chinese American who was her office manager for 20 years, so he's not a low-level guy. Did you say office manager? He was office manager in San Francisco, so he was higher up. He was meeting with ambassadors. He was, attending high-profile events. He was not a gopher. He was not just a mere driver, as Feinstein characterized him.
Well, perhaps she mischaracterized or misremembered. That's quite a different matter. And as office manager, he would have access to all sorts of information, as well as the comings and goings of Dianne Feinstein, who served as a chair of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence for years and years.
Yeah, and as a driver, because that was part of his capacity, presumably, he was in a position to overhear pretty much more than anything.
Right.
And as you heard in Donald Trump's kind of clip, she basically shrugged about this when it came out. When the FBI told her that this guy was working with the Chinese government, she didn't tell anyone. She didn't even tell her own staff. She just let him retire. So when you look at that tweet, she says, oh, well, the Chinese were approaching my guy, but I made sure he didn't work here anymore. They weren't approaching him. They were working with him. And she let him, she phrases that carefully because she didn't even fire this guy. This guy retired with a pension. He is now working at what appears to me to be a propaganda outfit in San Francisco, pushing dirt on Japan. So this isn't a guy that was merely recruited by China. He's a sort of a player in these geopolitical warfare battles, this militant Chinese guy who's professionally involved in this kind of thing. And he's out there actually continuing to make speeches where he is billed as a former aide to Dianne Feinstein. And that's what happens when you cover up things like that. The people get to go ride your coattails and continue to associate with you. He's not disgraced. He's still out there actually meeting. He met with a Congressman, Mike Honda, recently. He's still associating with these Washington types. He's still part of the political scene because Dianne Feinstein did not take swift action.
And his name again?
Russell Lowe, L-O-W-E.
Women's stories generally propagated in this country are totally false. They are not true. For example, 200,000 people, that's not true. Forcible recruitment, that was not true. And, sex slaves, that is not true.
I'm strongly opposed to establishing Comfort Women Memorial. Former Korean comfort woman Lee Yeon-soo and her friends said that they were recruited by Korean prostitution broker. Lee Yeon-soo explained how she was pleased to receive a red dress and a pair of leather shoes from a Korean prostitution recruiter. Yet she testified in front of an UN interrogator that she was abducted by Japanese military. Lee Yeon-soo has a history of making false statements. We have to stop this chain of fabrication and lies now.
I say this with a great deal of love and respect, but shame on you. Shame on you. Shame on you for denying what happened, and shame on you for the personal attacks on this woman, Grandma Lee.
Miss Lee Yeon-soo, first, the age that she was abducted from 14 years old to 16 years old. Next, the place that she was abducted. Her testimony has been changed from regional city of Korea to Taiwan. Who did take her away? A man in clothes like military uniform, a soldier, kamikaze pilot, kamikaze unit in Taiwan. How was she abducted? She said that the abductor had threatened with bayonet at newspaper interview in 2002. She said that the abductor had covered her mouth at her lecture in 2007. When, where, by whom, how? She always changes her insistence. The year she was abducted is only consistent. It was 1944. One day, she insisted that she was forced to be a comfort woman for 3 years. Somebody asked her, "Were you forced until 1947? World War II was over." Then she changed her insistence again to for 1 year. There is no consistency in her testimony.
Good afternoon, everyone. The meeting will come to order. This is the Thursday, September 17, 2015, meeting of the Public Safety and Neighborhood Services Committee of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. My name is Eric Marr. I'm the chair of the committee. To my right is Vice Chair David Campos. To my left is Supervisor Julie Christensen.
Item number 1 is a resolution urging the City and County of San Francisco to establish a memorial for comfort women.
Thank you. Next speaker, Mr. Lowe. And thank you for your work in the U.S. Senate for so many years.
Thank you very much, Supervisor. Thank you, other supervisors, for having this hearing. I want to thank the members of the Asian American communities that have stepped up to support Supervisor Marr's efforts. I worked 5 years with Senator Alan Cranston, 21 years with Senator Dianne Feinstein. Since 1975, I have visited Asia. I've been to Japan, China, Taiwan, South Korea, Hong Kong. And in 2006, I had the privilege of joining the survivors from the Comfort Women group and supporters in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul to demand acknowledgement for sexual enslavement of women by Imperial Japanese military. They do this every Wednesday. I just came back from Japan, and I met Mina Watanabe again. She's the Secretary General of WAM, Women's Active Museum on War and Peace. This was the group that was part of the 2001 UN Tribunal on Comfort Women and Sex Crimes. I presented her a copy of your resolution, Supervisor Marr. This was the first time she saw it. She shared with me that she had met with the executive director of the Commission on the Status of Women in D.C. earlier this year at her Comfort Woman seminar. I personally know the local opponents. I thought they always advocated against social injustice, but their rhetoric is right off the white pages of the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs on their views of the Comfort Women allegations. During my 26 years with the Senate, I know that if you speak or represent a foreign government, you need to register with the Department of State as an agent. Not doing so is a federal offense. As an elected official of San Francisco, you are honoring the survivors and their families for the unimaginable horror that was forced upon them in the prime of their young lives almost 80 years ago. This month marks the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II in the Pacific. The healing here begins with this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe.
Hi, my name is Russ Lowe, and I'm with Education for Social Justice Foundation. And we are developing curriculum to teach the history of the Comfort Women sexual slavery. that happened during the war in the Pacific. Imperial Japan began its conquest of Asia long before Pearl Harbor. By 1941, Japan already colonized Korea, Taiwan, and began its war on China. The rape of Nanjing, with 300,000 deaths of Chinese civilians, was a milestone in the Japanese Imperial Army's brutality. In order to maintain military morale, the Japanese government created a system of military brothels. Young girls and women were recruited by false promise of work or were outright taken against their will. They were called comfort women. Over 200,000 girls and young women were forced into sexual slavery. 80% of them did not live before the war was over. It was not until the 1990s that victims, now in their 50s and 60s, came forward to tell of their living nightmare. Japanese government, to this date, has never officially or sincerely apologized nor offered compensation. For 20 years, victim support groups in Japan, Korea, China, and the Philippines, and other Asian countries have demanded that Japan take responsibility, but that has not happened. 2 years ago, the San Francisco community groups and leaders officially supported the recognition of comfort women victims with the building of a Comfort Women Memorial. This memorial is now installed in San Francisco St. Mary's Square, a public park. But the memorial is not enough. Americans do not know this history and its impact on Asian immigration to the United States. Education for Social Justice Foundation was founded to produce materials for high school teachers on comfort women history. This is our first resource book, which has history of comfort women movement in California and documents from US and Japanese government that shows the creation of this government military sexual slave system. 2 high school teachers created lesson plans for classrooms use during World History sessions. San Francisco Unified School District has this resource guide now and will be in all the high schools. We are working with other school districts throughout California to include this resource guide. There has been interest from Korea and China on this book. Please go to our website for more information about this book. This book has primary documents, photographs. This is a Japanese document explaining how to set up the Comfort Women system. This is Grandma Lee, who provided the opening calligraphy here. Okay, she's still alive. She's in South Korea. And also, the lesson plans that the teachers created, they used the artwork from the survivors. These are drawings. And what we did with these drawings was we made them into puzzles. So it's another activity that the students can participate in. So I appreciate you taking time to look at our website and hopefully.
President, we would like to make 2 requests to the Human Rights Council. First, we request the Council repeal Special Rapporteur Ms. Kumaraswamy's report of 1996. Reason for the request are that some of its contents are not based on historical facts, but based on fictitious books such as pornographic novels and manga like this one. Also, the report contains many false testimonies which were coached to comfort women by a group called the Korean Council for Women drafted for military sexual slavery by Japan. The group has strong ties with DPRK, and its purpose behind the comfort woman issue is to defame Japan, demand money, and drive a wedge into the Japan-US ROK security partnership. Second, we request the Council to pressure South Korean government to fulfill its end of 2015 Japan-ROK agreement so that the two nations can resolve the comfort woman issue finally and irreversibly as they agreed upon. It's high time that the two nations' friendly relationships so that we can deal with more imminent problems which is the current world faces, such as the serious nuclear threat from DPRK. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
People who have waited here to speak on all sides of this issue. And let me begin by first addressing my friends in the Japanese American community who spoke out against this resolution. And I understand the point about the importance of harmony. And what I would say is that no one is, in my view, questioning the need to maintain harmony, and certainly harmony among San Franciscans, not only within members of the Asian American community, but all of us, is important. I think we have a difference of opinion in terms of how we attain that harmony, and I believe that harmony requires an acknowledgement of truth, of what happened, and I don't think that we can have harmony without an acknowledgement of what actually took place. And I think it is in that spirit that I am proud to support this resolution. I'm a student of history, and I love reading about history, and what's interesting about the discussion around the need for reparations for Japanese Americans is that a lot of interesting arguments were made in favor of it or against that. And one of the things that kept coming up as I'm reading some of the articles that were written about this is that people oppose reparations for Japanese Americans and oppose the U.S. government doing anything about that because, among other things, they said, it wasn't just the U.S. that did bad things. There was a senator, a pretty ultra-conservative senator, Jesse Helms, who said, I will only support reparations if we acknowledge all the horrible things that Japan did. And the reality is that human beings, as Supervisor Christensen said, of all walks of life do bad things to one another. And in this case, with what happened, so many horrible things were done by people on all sides. But the fact that is true doesn't mean that we should not acknowledge what happened here. And that's the point, that by acknowledging what happened here, we're not saying that no one else did anything wrong. To the contrary, something wrong was done. And so to those folks, the good people, including many good people who happen to be Japanese Americans, I hope that you take this in that spirit. And that as this item goes forward, which I think it will go forward and it will pass at the board, that you use the opportunity of the monument, of the statue, as a way of coming together, because I think that we have more in common than we do differences. I do want to address some of the members of the audience that came here, though, and spoke to deny what happened. And I say this with a great deal of love and respect, but shame on you. Shame on you. Shame on you for denying what happened, and shame on you for the personal attacks on this woman, Grandma Lee, who had the courage to fly from another side of the world to come here to speak.
Between 1965 and 1973, South Korean President Park Chung-hee sent more than 300,000 of his soldiers to fight in the Vietnam War. These soldiers served throughout the country, but were most heavily concentrated in Quy Nhon, Tuy Hoa, and Cam Ranh provinces. Although many of these soldiers served with distinction, South Korean troops are accused of committing a number of atrocities throughout the country. In the wake of the war, South Korean soldiers left behind thousands of children of mixed Korean and Vietnamese descent. Thousands of these children were conceived through forcible rape and sexual assault on a systemic level. Many more were conceived after young Vietnamese girls were kidnapped, sold, and forced into sexual slavery. Their children are known in Vietnam as the Lai Dai Han. Estimates about the number of women assaulted and the number of Lai Dai Han born as a result vary widely based on the report.
Dừa đó là họ đi lên đổ rác, họ tới ngừng đây họ uống sao không biết rồi. Dạ mấy cô mới gặp ông mà quát đây ông bị hiếp dâm mình.
Women have been through so much. They have suffered deeply and carry their wounds with them every day. Yet, when asked, they don't ask for much. Most of them seek the dignity and acceptance only an apology can provide.
Muốn chỉ là cô cũng khổ mà cô cũng xấu hổ biết bao nhiêu, hiếp dâm cô rồi bỏ cô khổ, còn cô giấu cũng biết chữ, làm cực khổ bỏ lên bỏ chuồng, ai nuôi nấng rồi. Tại hồi lúc đó thì cô nghĩ rằng sao số phận mình lại hẩm hiu như vậy, mà không hiểu làm sao mà mình lại bị như vậy. Rồi mình nghĩ cũng buồn là tại vì đợi con gái mình mà người ta làm gì người ta cũng chẳng cho mình được cái gì, nó thẳng là cũng không có cho được cái gì hết. Giờ đó giờ tuổi thân mà nghĩ tới ở đó giờ ăn hận là nó để con mình không có cho nó ăn học được, khổ do nó ăn hận không nhờ ai được hết.
Mẹ chúng tôi chống lại thì mẹ chúng tôi phải chết. Nếu mà mẹ chúng tôi chống lại thì gia đình mẹ của tôi sẽ bị khó khăn. Tôi nói với nguyện vọng của cuộc đời của tôi là quyết định phải làm cho bằng được.
Thousands of Vietnamese women have suffered with the memory of their assaults for decades. Yet in the face of great hardship, they have found that focusing on the dreams and aspirations of their children has allowed them to persevere. Many of these women have felt for decades that the South Korean government and the world would never acknowledge their suffering. Yet, by choosing to speak out, choosing to bear witness, the veil of silence has been lifted, and they will not stop speaking about it until they receive the apology from the South Korean government.
Young-ja ran away from home as a teenager to escape a father who beat her, finding her way to the red light district in a South Korean town that hosts a large US Army garrison. After she escaped home in the early 1960s, her pimp sold her to one of the brothels allowed by the government to serve American soldiers. On June the 25th, 64 years after the Korean War broke out, Cho joined 122 surviving comfort women, as they were called, in a lawsuit against their government to reclaim, they say, human dignity and proper compensation. The suit comes as an embarrassing distraction for the South Korean government, which has pushed Japan to properly atone for what it says were World War II atrocities, including forcing women, many of them Korean, to serve as sex slaves for its soldiers. The women claim the South Korean government trained them and worked with pimps to run a sex trade through the 60s and 70s for US troops, encouraged women to work as prostitutes, and violated their human rights.
In 1965, the Treaty on Basic Relations between Japan and the Republic of Korea was signed, and diplomatic relations between the two countries were normalized. When Japan and the Republic of Korea signed the treaty and normalized diplomatic relations in 1965, both countries signed the agreement on the settlement of problems concerning property and claims and on economic cooperation at the same time. In the agreement, both countries confirmed that the issues relating to property as well as claims had been settled completely and finally. Based on this agreement, Japan provided the Republic of Korea with $500 million of economic assistance up to the end of 1975, equal to almost 160% of the national budget of the Republic of Korea at that time. In addition to economic assistance for the 10-year period, the Japanese government greatly contributed to infrastructure development and rapid economic growth in the Republic of Korea by providing further economic assistance and technical cooperation, such as dispatching experts and accepting trainees. The total sum of financial support provided amounted to 3.8 times what was originally promised in the agreement, approximately 650.2 billion yen in economic assistance and 24.4 billion yen in technical cooperation. When the Republic of Korea was caught up in the Asian currency crisis of 1997, the government of Japan promised $10 billion of financial support through an international support framework. Furthermore, Japan proposed providing an additional $8.35 billion under the new Miyazawa Initiative, which made a substantial contribution to resolving the currency crisis. Japan has also been making sincere efforts on the issue of comfort women. While the issues concerning property and claims between the two countries have been settled completely and finally by the agreement of 1965, Japan took an additional initiative to establish the Asian Women's Fund in 1995 to fulfill its moral responsibility. Japan has also provided various forms of support to former comfort women. The successive prime ministers sent personally signed letters of apologies and remorse directly to each former comfort woman who had suffered from incurable physical and psychological wounds. Despite these efforts at reconciliation, the Republic of Korea has gone on to raise historical issues against Japan.
On December 28, 2015, both countries reached a historical agreement that this issue is resolved finally and irreversibly. Relations between Japan and the Republic of Korea are important, not only for both countries, but also for the peace and stability of the Asia-Pacific region.
And it was determined that these comfort women were not forced by the Japanese, but were recruited. Well, looking at the document and the different versions, one can question the legitimacy of that document. That's what I did, kids. I questioned it. So I contacted the National Archives outside of Washington, D.C. I made a telephone call. They advised me to send correspondence. I did. Well, yesterday they replied with this envelope. And in this envelope was the very report that appears on the internet. They authenticated the report, saying that this is an authentic report written in 1944 by the United States Army after they captured comfort women in the Philippines. You notice how I used the word captured and not rescued? Because they were captured. These comfort women were fleeing the advancing American military. They were fleeing with the Japanese. Right behind the Japanese soldiers were these comfort women. They got separated. And when they got separated, they got disoriented and lost, and that's when they were captured and interviewed by the United States Army. Now remember, 1944, there was a war going on, kids, and the Japanese as well as the Americans used anything to their advantage for propaganda purposes. So now the Americans captured these comfort women, these prostitutes who worked in concubines for the Japanese army, and it would have been easy for the American army to say, they were forced into prostitution. You see how nasty the Japanese are? But no, they could not say that because it would have been a lie. So the American army in this report reported the truth that these women volunteered, they were recruited, and the Japanese army did not terrorize the Korean peninsula by extracting 200,000 women at force. If there was 200,000 comfort women, they were recruited and they were well paid for their services, because it's disgusting that people are exploiting the situation for their advantage. This report goes on to mention that the women enjoyed a whole lot of money to where they were able to buy clothes, cosmetics, and other stuff for themselves on their visits into town. Sexual slaves can do that? Sexual slaves make that kind of money? Some women were even allowed to go back home after they paid their debt off. Sexual slaves can do that? Some women were even complaining that their schedule with the Japanese soldiers was too tight, that they were not able to accommodate all the soldiers, and that saddened them that they could not have sex with all the soldiers. Sex slaves feel that way?
Japanese military, as a matter of policy, never coerced the recruitment of young women in Asia. There have been some isolated cases where soldiers and officers who are defying the order from the above forcefully taken away some unfortunate ladies, young ladies to China or Indonesia. But again, there's no proof that the Japanese military as a policy as a whole did such thing.
But the number of women involved, the scale of it, seems to suggest some kind of systematic effort. And the women themselves claim that they were made to do this. They were almost screened by military authorities. So it does seem to have a systemic or institutional aspect to the policy.
Yes, I think Japanese leadership and the people acknowledge that there's a systematic involvement or systematic running of brothels or prostitution, the systematic way. But again, based on a voluntary basis. And there were people...
I mean, voluntary by the military officers, not by the women.
No, by women. There were. You may be surprised to hear this, but there are lots of newspaper ads and some other commercial advertisement for recruitment for those women. But remind you, though, sadly, the prostitution per se was legal in those days, not just in Japan. And there's between women and the Japanese military, there's a huge sort of business people who were running these brothels for the military, maybe at the request of military. So, yes, military was involved, but military never, as a policy, were coercing those women, and that's the sort of complexity of the issue.
But there are certainly women who claim to have been coerced.
There are a few cases coerced by those merchants of prostitution, and sometimes some whole family was in debt. Instead, their parents decided to pretty much sell. It's a human trafficking of a very saddest form. Those daughters to prostitution houses in exchange for some money. So in that case, on the individual basis, on the part of women, yes, there's a coercion.
But the military was paying for it just to get at this institutional nature of the sex trade. As I understand it, the soldiers were not paying for the prostitutes. No, the military, as an institution, was contracting with the intermediaries, buying the services of these women, and providing them to its soldiers.
No, but each soldier was paying. That's
individual.
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 Individual. It's a whole record. And many of the women, again, I don't want to sound like endorsing those sad, obviously wrong act. But the fact remains, on one hand, that some of the women are making a lot of money. Those are on the record. They are remitting their money home and then to their parents, and some of them are making much more money than the Japanese prime minister.
But you're saying that the military, in its official capacity, never paid for these services?
No, they probably paid for the people who are running the prostitution houses.
And the setup.
Houses.
I mean, these
but
were
the sex itself. It's not.
But there was a setup. There were houses in which, on military camps, there were places where this was being done. The military must have been housing these people.
Yes, that's right.
They created the infrastructure.
They created the infrastructure, and for that, the Japanese government and successive prime ministers acknowledged the wrongdoing of the past and apologized.
All right, let me get to the next point.
It has something to do with what Congresswoman Tsujimoto was just saying in the morning. In short, it's about the comfort women issue. This article, which came out in 1992 by Asahi newspaper, made us misunderstand that the Japanese military people were involved in this comfort women issue, as it says material showing the involvement in the comfort place. However, if you take a closer look at this article, you will find a different explanation. This article actually is a warning to be careful of rogue business people who are involved in recruiting comfort women. What it says is totally the other way around. Please look at the center in this panel. More than 80% of Koreans were elected in the due kind of state parliament election in those days. The governors of the 1st, 6th, 8th, 9th, 10th until 1945 of Chungcheongnam-do were Koreans. The other DOS were same. As to the Daejeon Police Department, the captain number 2 from the top and the superior detective were Koreans. Under this organization, it is inconceivable that the police people forcibly yanked comfort women. This comfort women issue has been spread to all over the world. In front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul, a comfort women statue is built. In New Jersey in the U.S., the same statue is built. Along the freeway, an advertising board is set up, saying Japanese made 200,000 Korean women sex slaves. All of them are intolerable disgraces to Japanese. We shall not allow those things to happen. Supposing 200,000 women were taken away, do you think all the parents just saw them being carted off without doing anything? Let's see the next panel. As the article says, comfort women were not forcibly taken away by military or police people. Only one article was made by Donga Daily and the others were by Asahi newspaper. According to the articles, you can see Koreans abducted girls of good families and sold them to Manchuria. They were Japanese girls at the ages of 17, 19 and 20, etc. The other articles say, as you can see, girls of farming families are cheated, divulge body houses, and the like. We can see that the police did right jobs clearly. We can find out that Japanese did something wrong, though checking articles very hard. I was very poor before the war ended. So, I knew that there were many poor girls who had to work as comfort women, for whom I have great sympathy. However, the fabricated story that only Korean women were yanked to be comfort women should be rectified.
she was forced taken to Indonesia when she was 13 in 1937. But Indonesia was a colony of Netherlands until 1941. How did the Japanese military make her a sex slave in Indonesia? Miss Kim Boktan said in France, "I was forced to be a sex slave at the time of Korean War." Wait a minute! Japanese military was defeated and disbanded in 1945. Korean War happened in 1950. Japanese military had nothing to do with her story. But she insists that she was abducted by Japanese military when she was 14 years old, and she was forced to be a sex slave for 8 years. She was born in 1926. When she was 14 years old, it was 1940. 8 years. She had been a sex slave until 1948. World War II was over in 1945. All Japanese soldiers were war prisoners after 1945. Who had forced her to be a sex slave after 45 until 48? Miss Kim Hak-sun testified that she had been sold to prostitute house by her mother when she was 14. This testimony is the contents of the court complaint. Her testimony is nothing to do with the Japanese soldier. Miss Kim Sundok said, in 1937, when she was 17 years old, she was fooled by the word "factory in Japan is looking for factory worker," and she was taken to comfort station in Shanghai. It is from 1938 that Japanese companies were permitted to recruit in Korea. So it was biased Koreans that deceived her. There are a lot of articles of newspapers in Korea that police arrested unscrupulous Koreans who had sold girls with kidnapping or deceiving. Japanese government at the time arrested the unscrupulous Koreans and protected the Korean women. Ms. Kang Il-chul said, when she came home from school, she was put on the truck bed by force. After 2 years since she quitted the school, she was taken away. It is quite different from that she was a student in that she was not a student. I doubt whether both are the truth. Miss Fan Kumju have changed her insistence in each interviews and lectures. Every time she tells about herself, she changed the situation she was abducted. It is so troublesome, so I focus on the age which she was abducted. 16, 17, 18, 20. 19, 14. How old will you say next time, Miss Fan Kumju? Others, there are 3 women who are testified that they were forced to work at military comfort facilities in Osaka or Taiwan. But Taiwan and Osaka were not the battlefield. They had come to work there as a prostitute. In fact, there are many records that many Koreans with prostitute license worked at prostitute town in Taiwan and Osaka. Let's take a look at the testimony of Korean witnesses of United States House of Representatives proposed House Resolution 121. It asked that the Japanese government apologize to former comfort women and include curriculum about them in Japanese schools. Congressman Mike Honda introduced it in 2007. Miss Lee Yeon-soo, first, the age that she was abducted from 14 years old to 16 years old. Next, the place that she was abducted. Her testimony has been changed from regional city of Korea to Taiwan. Who did take her away? A man in clothes like military uniform, a soldier, kamikaze pilot, kamikaze unit in Taiwan. How was she abducted? She said that the abductor had threatened with bayonet at newspaper interview in 2002. She said that the abductor had covered her mouth at her lecture in 2007. When, where, by whom, how? She always changes her insistence. The year she was abducted is only consistent. It was 1944. One day, she insisted that she was forced to be a comfort woman for 3 years. Somebody asked her, "Were you forced until 1947? World War II was over." Then she changed her insistence again to for 1 year. There is no consistency in her testimony. Ms. Kim Gunja, her testimonies. She was invited to work at the factory by Korean men. Her adoptive father said, "There is a place to make money. You should go there." Her adopted father asked her to go on an errand. She went there. It was a prostitute house. She was sold by her adoptive father or deceived by Korean men. Her testimonies are not related to the Japanese army.
One of Japan's biggest newspapers is in hot water over misreporting of the testimony. The paper is retracting its article. Last month, the newspaper retracted stories it ran on the so-called comfort women issue, saying they were based on a false account. It reported accounts given by a man in the 1980s and 1990s. He said he forcibly gathered women on the Korean island of Jeju during World War II and sent them to work in brothels. The paper said it interviewed about 40 people on the island in April and May to confirm his story, but could not find any evidence to support it. The president said he'll set up a panel of outside experts to study the case and its international implications.
The report was submitted to Asahi President Masataka Watanabe.
I once again extend my sincere apologies for causing a lot of trouble over the series of Asahi reports on those referred to as comfort women.
In August, the Asahi retracted past articles which were based on accounts by Seiji Yoshida. In those articles, Yoshida testified he had taken Korean women away against their will to serve Japanese soldiers. A researcher published findings in 1992 that Yoshida's testimony was very dubious, but the paper continued to carry his accounts in articles. The panel pointed out that the Asahi remained passive, failing to send reporters to confirm the findings. It says the Asahi betrayed the trust of its readers, and its actions should be criticized for violating journalistic ethics. The panel also questioned the Asahi's decision not to apologize to readers when retracting its reports. It said the paper failed in its role as a media organization and was irresponsible toward its readers.
I'll take what the panel says in the report seriously. I also promise to press ahead with reforms in a bid to fundamentally remake the company.
It's too late. We have waited for a long time. It is time to offer the real, serious, the sincere apology with his action.
Shame on you. Shame on you. Shame on you for denying what happened. Shame on you. Shame on you. Shame on you for denying what happened.